Well, you're under arrest for fraud.
Tell them this is a mistake.
Ada Bello, you are under arrest for fraud and embezzlement. The words landed in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday morning in front of 40 employees who had just watched her hand out payroll envelopes an hour earlier. 2 police officers walked straight past the reception desk to her office door. Tom stood by the window, arms folded, and did not look at her once. "Tom," Ada said, her voice cracking as the officer reached for her wrist. Tell them this is a mistake." He said nothing. He simply looked away. By the time the police car pulled out of the compound gate, half the staff were filming on their phones, and the woman who had built that logistics company from a single delivery bike and a borrowed generator was being driven to a police station with her hands cuffed in front of her. She had no idea, sitting in the back of that van, that the papers used to convict her had never once passed through her own hand. And she had no idea that the woman who forged her signature was at that very moment standing beside her husband, offering him a comforting shoulder to lean on. This is the story of what happens when a good woman is framed by someone patient enough to wait years for the right moment. And what happens when the truth, buried under layers of forged paper, finally claws its way back to the surface. Welcome to Tales of Africa Studio, where every story carries a lesson, every secret has a price, and every truth eventually comes to light. Sit back, relax, and let's begin today's unforgettable story. 10 years earlier, Ada and Tom were 2 broke, stubborn 20-somethings running a single delivery bike between them in Ibadan, ferrying parcels across the city for anyone willing to pay. Tom drove, Ada kept the books, chased payments, and slept 4 hours a night doing both. Neither of them had money. Both of them had more determination than sense. "One day," Tom used to say, wiping engine grease off his hands with an old rag, "we'll have a fleet. Real trucks, real drivers, not just me and this one bike falling apart under me." Ada believed him before there was a single reason to. She turned down a stable office job to keep the books for a business that, for its first 2 years, barely paid either of them a salary. When a supplier once offered them a used delivery van at a price they couldn't quite reach, Ada sold the small gold necklace her late father had given her at 16 without telling Tom until the money was already in his hand. "You shouldn't have," he said, staring at the cash. "You needed it more than I needed to keep it," she said simply. "We're building something that's worth more." They married in a small registry office with 4 witnesses and a shared plate of jollof rice afterward, because that was all the budget allowed. And it was, both of them agreed later, one of the best days of their lives. The business grew the way stubborn things sometimes do. Slowly, then suddenly. 1 van became 5. 5 became a proper fleet, with a warehouse and a logo and 40 staff on payroll. Ada handled operations and finance with a precision that made auditors nervous, in a good way. Tom handled client relationships and grew over the years increasingly comfortable being the face people photographed at industry dinners. It was at one of those dinners that Kate joined their orbit, brought on at first purely as a business development consultant, recommended by a client Tom respected. She was sharp, well-spoken, endlessly complimentary of Tom's vision, and from her very first week in the building, quietly, methodically observant of exactly how the company's finances actually moved. "Your wife runs a tight ship," she told Tom one evening, over drinks that had become a semi-regular occurrence. "Almost too tight. Doesn't it ever feel like she doesn't fully trust you with the numbers?" Tom frowned. "She keeps the books because she's good at it, that's all." Kate smiled and let the thought sit, the way she always did, never pushing, only planting. Over the following months, Kate became a quiet architect of doubt, one offhand comment at a time. "Your wife still treats you like the boy with the delivery bike. Doesn't a man like you deserve a partner who sees who you've become?" Tom defended Ada, at first, every single time. But doubt, left unchallenged long enough, calcifies into something that starts to feel like your own private conclusion. What Tom never noticed, because Kate had made very sure he never would, was that she had spent those same months quietly requesting access to financial systems to help streamline reporting, copying signature templates from old signed contracts, and studying, with real patience, exactly how Ada's handwriting curved on the letter A. The forged documents took Kate almost a year to assemble properly, a paper trail showing systematic diversions of company funds into a personal account, every signature on every transfer form matching Ada's handwriting with a precision that would fool anyone except a forensic document examiner nobody had thought to call yet. She waited for the exact right moment, a week when Tom was already exhausted, already primed, already halfway convinced by months of careful erosion, and delivered the discovery to him personally, tears in her eyes, voice trembling with rehearsed reluctance. "I didn't want to be the one to show you this," she said, sliding the folder across his desk. "But you deserve to know." Tom read through it twice. He should have called Ada into the room immediately and asked her to explain it face to face. He didn't. He called the company's lawyer instead, and the lawyer, seeing what looked like ironclad documentation, called the police. The trial moved faster than it should have. Tom, still reeling, gave a statement that damaged Ada more than it protected her, not out of malice, but out of the particular cowardice of a man who had already, quietly, decided he needed a way out of his own marriage, and had just been handed one gift-wrapped by someone else's cruelty. Ada's own lawyer, overworked and underprepared, couldn't counter the volume of falsified paperwork in the time the court allowed. "Mrs. Bello," Judge Adeyemi said, not unkindly, reading through the documents one final time. "The evidence before this court is extensive, and on its face, difficult to dispute. This court finds you guilty of fraud and embezzlement in the amount stated." He set a sentence of 2 years. Ada sat perfectly still as the words landed. She did not look for Tom in the gallery. He wasn't there to be looked for. If you've ever been punished for something you didn't do, by someone who was never made to answer for it, tell me in the comments, because what Ada builds from inside a prison cell is about to make every single person who doubted her regret it. Prison did not soften Ada. It sharpened her. She kept to herself the first few weeks, doing the work assigned without complaint, sleeping little, replaying every document she'd been shown in court, hunting for the one detail that didn't fit. She had built that company's books herself for a decade. She knew in her bones that she had never signed a single one of those transfer forms. And something about the way the letter A curved in her own supposed signature nagged at her every single night. It was a young prison chaplain named Ben who first noticed her sitting alone in the yard, a small notebook balanced on her knee, writing out dates and numbers from memory with the intensity of someone building a case rather than serving a sentence. "You don't strike me as someone who did what they say you did," he said, sitting down beside her without asking permission first. "Nobody in here did what they say they did," Ada said flatly. "That's what everyone says." "Maybe," Ben said, "but most people aren't reconstructing 3 years of financial records from memory in a prison notebook." Something in his tone, not pity, just plain attention, made her look up properly for the first time. She told him everything, in pieces, over the following weeks. The forged signatures, the timeline that didn't quite match the date she remembered actually being in the office, the way Kate had arrived exactly when the company started growing fast enough to be worth stealing from. Ben, it turned out, had trained as a paralegal before choosing chaplaincy, and he still had contacts in a legal aid clinic that specialized in wrongful conviction appeals. "Give me something concrete," he said, "and I'll get someone to look at it properly." "Give me time," Ada said, and I'll give you something concrete. She spent the better part of a year building it, cross-referencing dates from memory against delivery logs she knew existed in the company's archived records, writing detailed letters to the legal aid clinic Ben connected her to, describing exactly which transfer forms felt wrong and why, down to the pressure and slant of a signature she'd been writing the same way since secondary school. Meanwhile, 3 months into her sentence, a court clerk arrived at the prison with a fresh set of papers. Ada opened them with hands that had learned, by then, not to shake quite so easily. Divorce papers, filed on Tom's behalf while she sat behind bars, unable to properly contest anything. She sat with that fact for a long time. Then she folded the papers neatly, put them under her mattress, and went back to her notebook. Because grief, she'd learned fast in that place, was a luxury you rationed carefully, or it swallowed you whole. The legal aid clinic took 9 months to secure what they needed, a forensic document examiner willing to review the original transfer forms pro bono, comparing ink aging, pen pressure, and letter formation against verified samples of Ada's actual signature, pulled from years of old company paperwork. The report, when it finally came back, was unambiguous. The signatures on the fraudulent transfer forms showed inconsistencies in stroke pressure and letter spacing, inconsistent with natural handwriting, the telltale signs of careful, deliberate tracing rather than a genuine signature written at speed. Combined with digital metadata Ben's contact had pulled from the company's own server logs, showing the fraudulent documents had been created and edited from a computer registered to Kate's employee account, at hours when Ada's own access logs showed she was nowhere near a computer at all, the case for appeal built itself. The hearing, when it finally came, took less than a day. Judge Adeyemi, reviewing the new forensic evidence with visible discomfort at his own earlier ruling, vacated the conviction entirely. "Mrs. Bello," he said, "this court apologizes for the harm caused by evidence that should have been more rigorously examined the first time. You are free to go, with your record fully expunged." Ada walked out of that courtroom 18 months after walking into a prison cell, with nothing waiting for her outside except a small overnight bag, a company she no longer had any legal claim to, and a quiet, steady man named Ben standing by the courthouse steps, because he'd said he would be there, and he was. The unraveling on the other side had already begun without her. Kate, confident that a wrongful conviction would bury the truth permanently, had spent Ada's imprisonment quietly siphoning company funds into a rival logistics firm she'd secretly been building under a different name, poaching 2 of Tom's biggest clients along the way, and telling Tom, each time, that the slow bleed in revenue was simply market conditions. By the time Ada's conviction was overturned, Kate's rival firm was already collapsing under its own greed, overextended on loans, built on stolen capital and forged client contracts that were beginning to unravel under scrutiny from investors, who'd started asking uncomfortable questions about her sudden, unexplained wealth. A financial journalist looking into the collapse of her new firm stumbled, almost by accident, onto the same forensic irregularities the legal aid clinic had already flagged in Ada's case, and the 2 investigations, run entirely independently, arrived at the same conclusion within weeks of each other. Kate was arrested at the airport, boarding a flight out of the country with 2 suitcases and a laptop full of evidence she hadn't quite finished deleting. Tom, meanwhile, had watched his own company collapse in slow motion, client contracts lost to the very firm he hadn't realized his own consultant had been secretly running, cash flow he could no longer track without the bookkeeping precision he'd spent a decade taking for granted, and a payroll he could no longer meet. Within a year of Ada's release, the business the 2 of them had built from a single delivery bike was formally dissolved. He read about Kate's arrest in the newspaper, sitting alone in a rented 1-room flat that had nothing in common with the office he'd once been photographed in. He read about Ada's exoneration in the same week, in a much smaller article, and he sat with that paper in his hands for a long time before he could bring himself to move. He found her outside the small logistics consultancy she'd started with Ben's help 6 months after her release. Modest, still finding its footing, but hers. Entirely and legally hers. Built this time with contracts triple-checked and a signature verification process she insisted on for every single document that left the building. Ada! His voice barely carried across the parking lot. She turned, and for a long moment, neither of them said anything at all. I should have called you into that office the day Kate showed me those papers, he said, the words coming out in a rush like he'd been rehearsing them for 18 months and could no longer hold them back. I should have asked you to your face instead of believing a folder over 10 years of knowing exactly who you are. I filed for divorce while you were in a cell because it was easier than sitting with what I'd let happen to you. I am not asking you to take me back. I don't think I've earned the right to even ask that. I just needed you to hear me say it was never you. It was always my own cowardice. Ada listened to all of it without interrupting, the way she'd learned to listen to everything now. Fully, carefully, without rushing to fill silence that hadn't finished saying what it needed to say. I believe that you believe that, she said finally. And I'm not interested in punishing you for it forever. But I spent 18 months in a cell because the man who promised to stand beside me chose comfort over asking one honest question. That's not something an apology in a parking lot fixes, Tom. That's not how trust works. It has to be rebuilt the same slow way it was broken. Except this time, I'm not the one who has to do the rebuilding. Tom nodded, tears finally falling freely. What do I do with that? Whatever the next honest thing in front of you is, Ada said. Same as I had to.
She didn't offer him money. She didn't offer him a symbolic gesture wrapped in forgiveness. She simply turned, walked back into the building bearing her own name on the door, and let him stand there with nothing but the truth he'd finally said out loud. Ben was waiting inside, going over a delivery contract, with the same careful attention he'd once given her scattered prison notebook. You okay? He asked, not looking up right away, giving her the space to answer or not. I will be, she said, and meant it in a way she hadn't been able to mean it in a very long time. Over the following 2 years, Ada's consultancy grew steadily. Not explosively, the way Tom's business once had, but solidly, built on the kind of scrupulous, verified paperwork that made her reputation as the most trusted account in the city's logistics sector. She began quietly mentoring other women navigating wrongful termination or fraud accusations, offering free consultations to anyone the system had moved too fast to actually listen to. She and Ben married 2 years after that courthouse morning, in a small ceremony with the same kind of modest, unhurried joy she remembered from her first wedding. Except this time, she noted privately, everyone in the room had actually earned their place there. Kate served 4 years for fraud before disappearing from public record entirely. Tom rebuilt slowly, taking work as a delivery driver for another company for the first 2 years, the same job he'd started with a decade and a half earlier, learning properly this time what it meant to earn trust one small, honest day at a time, instead of assuming it came bundled with success. He never asked Ada for anything again. He simply kept showing up, quietly, wherever honest work needed doing, the way people do when they finally understood that some debts aren't paid off in a single conversation. They're paid off slowly, in the accumulated weight of 1,000 small, unglamorous choices to finally be someone worth trusting. If you've ever had to rebuild your name from nothing after someone else tried to take it from you, tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what it taught you about who actually stood beside you when it mattered. Subscribe so you never miss the next story like this one. And remember, the truth may take its time, but it rarely stays buried forever.